Hello, everyone. Welcome to the State of the Industry. It's a special series that we're going to be doing here over the next couple of weeks, talking to industry leaders in capital markets, CEOs from the MSR world, just getting a sense of everything that everybody's talking about behind the scenes, bringing to the forefront, making it digestible, and giving everybody access and visibility to some of the market volatility and chaos that's going on, within the mortgage industry. So today we have CEO and founder of EPM, Equity Prime Mortgage, Eddy Perez, also a very influential member of MORPAC or leader from MORPAC. Eddy, how are you today?
I'm good. And you, brother? How are you?
Doing very, very well. So I know there's a lot that people want to hear about, and they definitely want to hear from you. So I want to get kicked off and just start and talk a little bit about big news that came out at the end of last week. We saw, what might be the start of a lot of M&A activity, cross country and RPM, also known as Lend Us, consolidating, which is a pretty big move. So, you've been through these cycles before. We saw it back in 2017 and 2018. When you start to see these trends based upon headwinds, what are your initial thoughts?
First of all, I'll say I'm not surprised. I do think this one's a little bit different, though. And the reason I think it's a little bit different is because 17 and 18 did not have the run of 19 to 21. So I think you're going to see a lot of people that want to move on with their life, do a few different things, maybe slow down a little bit and let somebody else. I'm curious to see what that's going to be doing culturally to those organizations. But like anything else, great leaders can adjust and bring it together and just lead with a lot of radical transparency. But yeah, I'm seeing it every day. I'm getting offers on M&A. I'm getting curious. I would probably wait a little bit right now because as we've seen what's happened in the market, last quarter's numbers doesn't mean it's going to be this quarter's numbers. And I think there's a lot of curious questions I'd ask to it. But I think this one is going to be, I think there's going to be a lot of consolidation because of just the age factor in the industry.
Yeah. It's funny. It's interesting you say that. So last year we saw, Homebridge get merged with Figure. Peter Norton, industry legend, unbelievable track record as a leader of bankers. He's 30-year track record. He's crushed it. So, a lot of people looked at that and said, this is kind of Peter, semi-retiring, retiring. And I think the theme that we're starting to see is like, a lot of companies that are led by or owned by leaders that might be at the point where they're exiting or thinking about exiting. So you're touching on that there might be more or less not just, M&A activity for natural purposes, but more or less like, people riding off in the sunset.
I do believe that you'll see them. I mean, it's going to be the next couple years when you deal with the inventory challenges, because we built the same amount of homes in the last decade that we did during the Great Depression.
Yeah.
That has a lot of inventory. I mean, I think that's a huge opportunity, renovation, a huge opportunity, construction of perm, huge opportunity. But I think at the same time, think about it. Who doesn't want to ride off in the sunset like, Michael Jordan did after winning those championships on the second three-peat? This was a heck of a run. You may want to do other things or, maybe you want to be, creative as Peter was to bring in blockchain to make sure he leaves his organization in a real good spot. And I know that he plans on staying in there. Maybe it's something different. Maybe it's something creative. I just think that it's going to lead to a lot of natural innovation, creativity, imagination.
Okay. So let's build off that and let's talk a little bit about other consolidation that's going on, because there's definitely multiple forms of consolidation. I think right now we're seeing, what I saw play out in wholesale in 2018 and 2019 is playing out in the distributor retail channel right now in the current over the last year, which is, client acquisition through alternative mechanisms. So like when you think about in 2018 in wholesale, it was kind of a price war. It was something that was widely talked about. And as a result of that price war, the big market share leaders became bigger and the smaller market share leaders the smaller leaders really, kind of exited the channel. Now we're seeing signing bonuses, all these different mechanisms in the market where people are throwing obnoxious money at, for recruiting loan officers. How do you think that plays out this year? Because I think last year there was a lot of disposable cash, and last 2 years there's been a lot of disposable cash. So, as a CEO, maybe they're thinking like, hey, instead of paying taxes on this money, we'll deploy it for customer acquisition and give signing bonuses out. Now that issue's probably, that's no longer the problem that they're dealing with. Now, margins are tightening, volumes decreasing. How is this all going to play out?
I think we'll always see signing bonuses. I think that's just how some people naturally, want to build their culture and their environment. They think it's a good way. They look at it as, okay, it's really tough to transition once you come on to a new organization. So I view it as a 2-year investment. What you have to take into consideration is, as lenders, especially independent mortgage bankers, we're held to a certain standard. And if you have your Fannie, Freddie, and Ginnie Mae approvals, you're held to a certain standard. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of covenances in places, especially when it comes to profitability and requirements on that, and also certain liquidities you have to have. So it could be where you may be flush at the moment, but you're going to have to start watching that, because if not, even if you have all the money in the world, I'm not saying that they may not say, okay, hey, this was a slight violation, and they'll forgive you and everything of that nature, but they're not going to let you, especially regulators and all that too, run completely empty and dry. So some of that may stabilize. We're talking about inflation in so many different ways. That may be some of the sign-on bonus inflation or inflation you're talking about that's got to get brought down. But
Yep.
You also got to think about, what's going on in just the market in general.
Yes.
How are they going to collect that revenue back? How are they just really putting it down 2 years from now? What's going to really go on there?
Well,
but I think there'll be a lot of consolidation there as well.
Well, I think that's the bigger kind of dynamic at hand, which is like, when you're giving out those sign bonuses and you want to, maybe you build that into your margins as far as like, the price that those LOs are selling is a little bit higher because they've got some sign-on bonus built in their margins. And that might not have been a big deal when, rates were in the 3s or even the high 3s or low 4s. But now we're in a whole different stratosphere.
Yeah.
And realistically, there's only so much money that can go into the margin. So, how does that, from a competitive standpoint, with less customers, less inventory, and consumers now kind of stretched in their what they qualify for, how does that all play out?
You bring up a very interesting point that is going on in the market. If you look at how pricing is drawn up, you see a lot of people do not know how pricing's created. But if you look at the mortgage-backed securities right now, there is not the yield that used to be there. And I think that's a lot of bondholders realizing that prepayment speeds are at, I've heard anywhere from 32 to 52 months. So instead of giving a lot of yield, they're holding back. And that's why you're also seeing in a lot of loans, if there's LLPAs, that people are having to use to sell fees now that they didn't probably since about 2007.
Yep.
It's a whole new world order. That's what I'm really saying. But it's still a very positive new world order. It's just how things shift. So I would say that a lot of it has to do with the mindset, but you're bringing in a very interesting, the yields are not there to bury that anymore. And yield and volume at times can really, I don't want to say hide, but it can really mask, probably a better way to put it, a few things that are going on. But, unless something happens, but the Fed has been very, very honest and upfront saying that they have to curb all inflations, including, what they think the middle class is getting affected with when it comes to housing appreciation, everything of that nature. So I don't know if that could be played the same way. There's a lot of mechanisms. I'd even say not even factors, mechanisms at play here.
Yeah. And I would also say like, it's like, these are the things these are the uncontrollables. Like at the end of the day, when people are doing these strategies and they're saying, hey, we're going to give a signing bonus here, we're going to do that, and we're just going to build it into their rate sheet, that's based upon those current market conditions. You might forecast rates are going to go up, but it's really hard to forecast, those coupons maxing out where you can't actually build the spreads in that you need to. And now all of a sudden these LOs that, like you said, haven't been charging discount points or origination fees are now in a position where every loan has to have a point or a point and a quarter, which is going to create, obviously friction between the organization and the LO. I guess I want to build off that topic and talk a little bit about, you've gone through these cycles before. 2017, 2018, after the 2016 election, we saw rates take off. I have talked to a lot of different people that have said this is a different animal. This has, a taper tantrum severity involved and like aggression to it, except even more severe.
Yes.
So how do you feel? I mean, going through Q1, you're, obviously you talk to a lot of people as a part of your network in the MBA. What's the sense of how people are approaching this volatility and this speed of change?
Well, I think there's some context we need to give here because you actually nailed it very, very well. And I commend you on that. You could tell you're in the field of battle every day. This is definitely a taper tantrum, but even more severe. And the reason it's more severe is just to use very easy numbers in the taper tantrum of 13 to 14, which that caused some M&A. They said, okay, we're not going to buy anymore, but anything that runs off, we're going to replace. So they were still buying every day. So if they had, we're not going to buy new, but if we had 1 million run off, we're going to buy 1 million new, just to use very easy numbers. They're not doing that. If it runs off, it runs off. So in other words, that's closed off.
Yep.
So you have a taper tantrum, not buyers. That's why you've seen a huge inclination of interest rates, because the bondholders that want to buy it not only are paying a lower yield, they also know the Fed's not involved. So in other words, they don't have to pay as much because they know what the prepayment speeds are going to be. And you have the inventory and even just a mental shrinking, because even though this year is still the projections of $2.6 trillion in the industry, which I think the record says it's like the 6th best year ever, it ain't 21 and it's not 20. And a lot of people are going to have that short term. So you have a very unique interest rates have risen, less buyers and less inventory. And you have also, you got to imagine this too. Another thing that we have to throw into this, you have COVID that played into it. And what I mean by that is, I live in the South. You have a major migration of people coming to the South. So you're going to have also a challenge. A changing of demographics from population, type of work, everything of that nature.
Yep.
And that changes home buying and refinancing. So, the markets that used to be hot, not that they still won't be good, but there is major population shifts going on.
There is for sure. So I guess when you think about the, one other dynamic that ties into all of this, which is, after the election in 2016, that we saw basically over the course of it, I would say 10 quarters, 9 to 10 quarters that followed the 2016 election, we were in an elevated interest rate environment. Okay. Now, obviously, COVID is what ended that environment, and with all the stimulus that came into the system, and now we've had a really good run for the last basically another 10 quarters. So when we look at this change and this cycle, historically speaking, it's anywhere from 8 to 12 quarters that you'll be in these either elevated interest rates or rates at lower levels. Mm-hmm. With that said, the industry has hired, as a whole, the most growth that's ever happened in the mortgage industry ever, the most bodies that were ever added on a per organization basis. And then on top of the body, the headcount, the cost per person massively went up. You and I talked about this before. I've talked about this with a lot of people. In 2020 and 2021, there were literally wars for underwriters and processors and everybody on the sun. Yep, absolutely. And so you got yellows on the front lines getting huge signing bonuses, negotiating the highest payouts and all that stuff. You have operations people getting their income increased, getting signing bonuses and getting their incomes increased by 50%. And here we are, and we know that the overall volume in the industry year over year has dropped by 50% across the board. So 50% decline. Cost structure is at the highest level it's ever been. How does this play out? Because we've seen some firings and we've seen some downsizing, but the severity of those or the size of those has not been at the magnitude of how much the growth has happened over the last 2 years.
I think it's going to take a lot of leadership, and it's going to take a lot of radical transparency, something that you and I have all talked about, where people just have to be very, very candid. I talk about those mechanisms that you have to be profitable every quarter, or you do risk the health of the organization. And you just got to lay it out there. But I think AI, you're already seeing a spike in AI. I think that's what's going to also drive down the cost. And then people are just going to have to understand that the margins aren't there, the comp cannot be there, the volume's not there. You have a big, trifecta, fourfecta, fivefecta. You have a lot of factors into play. I think just people have to understand, and this is the tough part. You're actually saying what I'm going to tell you is the tough part. And I'm not saying just operationally, even origination, they have to understand, given, especially, you're talking about conventional loans that are a whole lot easier and everything of that nature. The old guard that I'll say of my comp's 100 or 150 for a $400,000 loan. Let's just use that easy number. 300. Let's just use 300. It's very hard to justify making $4,500 a loan if you're 150 basis point comp with a $300,000 loan amount, with how easy it is nowadays, with how much AI, which how much, you've got, God, what is that? Oh my God, day one certainty with Fannie Mae, things of that nature, appraisal waivers. The FHFA is doing a great job with a lot of the changes they're bringing to appraisals to try to make them a little bit smoother and better. It's very hard to justify that number. So people are going to have to get used to making less. However, it's more of the mental hurdle, because are they really making less if they're spending a quarter of their time? You see, time's the only commodity you have in this world. So if it's easier, faster, and better, you can't expect the same comps. And I'm saying that across all the realms, even myself as an organization. If I'm doing those loans, I can't expect to make the same as it. That's just good for the consumer. If we think about the consumer in the end, I'm not saying we don't justify what we have to do, because we do. We have a lot of responsibilities. Plus, when as a whole, this whole industry between the commercial side, residential side, everything is financing, $4, $5, $6 trillion a year. We have a huge responsibility to the everyday American and what we provide for them. You have to understand that dichotomy and really what it's about. And, I think if you said to everybody, if you could take out of your mind 19, 20, 21, in 18, if I told you, hey, Anthony, you're dealing with this struggle, you're going to make this, half of what people made. People are like, oh my God, I'm signed up for it all day. They just have to get back to that and understand that they have to understand what the waves are.
Well, that's the leadership piece. That's a big part. And you and I both know, one of the most consistent issues within the mortgage industry is communication within these different org structures, transparency, and the ability to align around these things. In the last cycle, we saw leadership, and most of these, let's just say distributed retail companies, last thing they want to do is, upset the apple cart. They're so worried about telling everybody the realities of the situation that they're just bleeding. And I think right now there's probably going to be a lack of empathy from the loan originators at these companies when they hear this from leadership, because they're going to sit there and say, hey, the last 2 years, you guys have been crushing it. Now you're coming to me and asking me to cut comp. You weren't giving me a piece of the action then. So that's where good leadership has to close the gap. That's where, to me, as if you're the CEO of a company or whoever the leaders of these organizations, you got to be able to bring not just your salespeople, you got to bring the whole org together and align and say, hey, here's where we're at. Now, if our goal is, let's hit our non-negotiables. We got to deliver a great experience or we're all out of business, right? Like the realtors, they won't send us business if we're not delivering there. We got to be somewhat competitive, whatever that is, whatever that looks like in each market. And then we got to be able to keep the lights on, right? So we got to make money. So if you identify those three things and you back into it and say, okay, what are the sacrifices, whether that's, reducing comp, that's, cutting overhead, whatever those things are. But if you don't have the conversation, then that's where the fear steps in. That's where the uncertainty steps in. And that's where people either leave organizations or bad things happen. So when you think about your past experiences with this, what would you tell loan officers today and operations team members that are maybe fearful of what's going to happen or not, trying to understand how this impacts them?
It goes back to that radical transparency piece, but I think you got to really go into the math, and you have to, as leaders, understand how the math is. This is where, we talked about the bond yields. You talk about even servicing values. Hey guys, this is what's normal for a servicing value. Here's a strip, and you explain it as best as you can. Some people may not understand it, but they'll at least respect it. I think in today's day and age, it's easier because, we've got virtual calls. You can have a whole company throughout the whole country on a call, and you can really say it out there. You could record it. You can resend it out there. So that's when the real culture play comes into it. And you got to talk about culture. You got to talk about the vision. You have to talk about where you're going. You have to be so radically transparent that you'll forget that, oh my God, I left that out. I got to resend it out there again. So then you have to always be up in your radical transparency and just put it out there.
That's a good point. So in 2017, when I met you for the first time, it's funny because some of the dynamics that are going on right now, we're just kind of in the first inning of this, but where it's going is very much what we dealt with in 17, 18. And I remember at that time, I ran into you in Philly. There was a lenders a conference or something or get together going on. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about this, and I talked to some of the other CEOs that were there, and their big thing was this is like, I am trying to be transparent with my team. However, my competitors, whoever those, distributor retail guys are that they're competing against, were out there telling, recruiting and saying, no, that's not, really true. But they're like basically, using those things as opportunities to recruit. And now you got LOs that are sitting there like in the crosshairs, like, wait, who do I believe? Like, is my company just trying to cut me? Is this really real? And that's, again, this is the fun part about competition is great leadership can overcome those things. Weak leadership will either cater to the atmosphere and say, oh, you know what, we're not going to cut comp, or we're not going to talk about these things. We'll just let it, stagnate. Like, where are you going to be on this? So how do you think that mechanism plays into, this next 18 months with already a very aggressive recruiting kind of time in our industry?
I think the organizations, and that's in anything, we've talked about distributor retail, but also in wholesale, because, you talked about the price war that went on there. It's going to really be the people that explain. I don't want to use the word education because I think a lot of people in this industry know it real well, so they're educated in it. It's going to be those that know how to convey the knowledge of the industry in very basic ways. Like, we're talking about when I've talked with you before, like, hey, grab the coupon. Here's the rates. Here's how you figure out. Here's the multiple. I think it's one of those where people, hey, here are the expenses. Here's what it goes. The average net income through history has been 30 to 50 basis points. Hey, we're willing to lean into it, but we have to do that. I think if people see, to your point, over communication, which I don't know if that's really possible, but you can at least go for it. That is what's going to be very crucial right now. And the people, because sure, look, in the recruiting game, we all know some things are said.
Yeah.
some theories out there. Hypothetically speaking, if you were the worst loan officer in the world, but I came here and made you the greatest, shouldn't you owe it to? So let's
not think owe it, but it's more like, haven't you earned it? Like I always kind of look at it as you build like leadership and trust capital. So like, to me, I kind of look at it and our people, and I know you've done the same thing. It's, it's more about your track record because, you've been in the trenches with people. I think the organizations where there's like the distance between the LO, whether it's a broker LO or a retail LO, and that leadership team, the farther that distance is, the less communication and touch points exist. That's where there's less trust and leadership capital. And that's where, those are the people that are going to be more concerned, more weary about like not hearing what's going on. So we have, I want to keep, got about 5 minutes here. I have a couple more things I want to hit you on here.
Please, man, come on.
So when you think of, the consolidation, you think of, the industry at large, obviously, I think we've seen direct to consumer is very much, I don't want to say, dead. It's definitely going into a state that it's not going to be
transforming. It'll adjust.
Transforming.
It'll adjust. That's a certain that's a certain type of consumer that wants to do that.
Absolutely. And it's more market driven. And right now, we've seen better.com. We've seen some companies that have really had major layoffs. So that's already sort of playing out. Now in the wholesale, and I would say the retail channels, what we're seeing is both, the big guys acquiring little guys. We're seeing a heavy recruitment or customer acquisition, either brokers through pricing, LOs through recruiting. when you think about this next 18 months and we think about the inventory issues and how tight the purchase market is, what are the competitive things that, truly matter outside of service, pricing competitiveness that you would sit there and say, hey, LOs, like you need to have access to this, or, this is the most aggressive thing a company can add value for?
I mean, I think the biggest value any organization can add is what I've heard in the last week or two, and not from like companies like Ribbon and stuff like that. Not that if that's all you could get, that's not bad, but there's now opportunities now for bridge financing that's going out there. So for your retail channels or anything, where you can say to your retail leaders, hey, this is how much the pot is every month. You can now empower the customer to put it in as a cash offer and then refinance it and follow all the guidelines. And you're starting to see that, because basically what you're doing is that middle layer of somebody else is now getting cut out, which I'm not surprised, because they show up. Now the opportunity is going to be there for those that have cut, but I think that's going to be a huge advantage. I mean, think about it from an originator standpoint. Think about it from a realtor. Think about it even not so much from a builder, because obviously it takes a while to create the inventory, but think about it from that perspective of all of a sudden your buyer is going to be coming in as a cash offer, and then 30 days later it refinances, or better yet, you get a 30-day contract and you still get it closed in time like it was a cash offer. That's a lot of flexibility and athleticism that you're now starting to see. So that's going to really, the companies that really bring that to the forefront are going to be very good for the originator, as well as just for the overall consumer experience. I mean, we want to talk about making the consumer experience better. Think about it. Their major stresses. Oh my God, I've looked at 50 houses and I can't get one.
Yeah, it's a big deal. That it's a competitive edge for the buyer for sure. I think right now, like one of the things that we are starting to see is not in all markets. Obviously, there's certain markets that are like overly hot, but there are. I mean, right now we're seeing like more inventory come online.
Yeah,
less buyers in different price ranges because of the qualification restrictions. I suspect that in the hot markets, this is going to be the competitive advantage that LOs need. In the other markets, we're going to get a little bit more normalized, but inventory is still going to be a major pain point. So, I guess the other thing I'd like to hit on before we wrap up here is, MSR it's an interesting thing. It's like, most loan originators, they don't understand how MSR works. I even would say that I'm still learning, conversations with you, different people in the industry on the capital markets side, that I'm still learning about how, the liquidity requirements, when you're able to actually profit off it, how the profit is determined, and also how market conditions determine your multiple and what you're able to sell for, but also how that all plays into your rate sheet. So right now we've seen a lot of people talking about how MSR, like, it's the hottest it's ever been. Multiples are the biggest they've ever been. How does that market play out here for lenders that have servicing, that are selling their servicing?
I think they're going to get great bids. I think it'll put them in a position, if they want to reinvest it all back into the organization, that'll really put them at an advantage. And to your point, they're going to be more liquid, not liquid on paper, like liquid, like true. The money is sitting not on a balance sheet, sitting in a bank. That's going to provide a lot of advantages. They may be able to give a little bit of a better multiple, or even take less money to be a little bit more aggressive. But I think it's also going to shift. One of the things the originators at times can get a little upset about is, oh my God, you're calling my customer. Well, you may not be, but if you sell it to somebody, that's just, I think something that people have to understand is, if the consumer's out there shopping and they now have 30 to 40 different data points to know if they're shopping, and then they're requesting a payoff, they're doing that, some of the, red meat that was thrown out over the years about that's a mindset that's going to have to change too, because those people paid up for that servicing, and
people are not going to have the choice this cycle. So, like, I mean, right now, if it's going to be, in order to hold servicing, the liquidity requirements for the lender are massive. So realistically speaking, you got to kind of pick your poison. Do you want to have a sharp price? Do you want to have the resources? Because the only liquid event, the only capital event, is when they sell servicing. So yes, you're making money monthly off the mortgage payments, but that's incremental. That's not like the
or
big
if you
ticket
borrow
item.
against it, but there's only a certain amount. You can't liquefy all the way. You can only borrow a certain percentage of it.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's
so it's kind
going
of
to change LOs.
You got to make a deal, the deal that works best for your business model. But I think the interesting thing right now is that, like, we're talking about rates, 5%, 5.5%, 6%. I've heard LOs tell me they're in the mid sixes, high sixes. So when I think about those rates, like 2017, 2018, rates never went this high. And then 2019 or 2020, 2021, we had this huge refi boom, and rates, we were coming off rates that were only in the fours. So like with this, if we get 18 months or 24 months of buildup of loans in this rate range, on the other side of it, whoever owns that servicing or whoever's the best at getting to the consumer fastest is really gonna, be in a great position. So it'll be interesting to see how lenders equate servicing into the way they're communicating to the LO, and even trying to bring transparency and saying, hey, if we want to hold on to this because of this, that might impact your comp. That might impact the way we do business, because we think it's more valuable to have maybe have a little bit less aggressive of a rate today or a price today for the opportunity to hold this servicing. Do you think that's a dynamic?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think it's going to be huge. And that's one of the things that's morphing, as we say, of the new world order. It's now servicing is going to have a different play. And now that we're even talking about it, because think about it, was anybody really even talking about servicing even 4 or 5 years ago, 3 years ago? Now the knowledge is getting better. So that's why I say is where you leverage the knowledge and you're just really, I'll say this over and over. I mean, you've talked about that. If you're just radically transparent, something that you said is people respect leadership. And, one thing that we've touched on is support is going to be extremely important now, because it's going to be really about building relationships and keeping those relationships going. And what you're not good at, you don't really need to be involved. Even if you take a little bit less of a pie, and that's what you're talking about here, you're taking a little bit of less of a pie because of servicing in a different way. But if somebody's providing you the ability to get your homeowners in there with less stress, which is the ultimate consumer safety, if you focus on consumer safety, which is reduction stress, that reduces the stress of your staff, reduces the stress of all your referral partners, you're just going to thrive a lot more. But it's going to have to take a lot of understanding, and I definitely think an adjustment in mentality.
Yeah, and there has to be a sacrifice. Like, this is one thing Matt Ishbia would always say is you can have two of the three: price, service, technology, but you can't have all three. So you got to choose where are you going to sacrifice where you're spending money. Is it in their price? Is it in the quality of your customer experience or your client experience? Or is it going to be the investments you're making in technology that might help you stay in front of customers long term, or build a better mousetrap overall? So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. Eddy, this has been a great session. I really appreciate you taking the time for doing this, and thank you for everything you've done for the industry for many years. We appreciate you. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, brother. Thank you. Enjoyed it, and it was a great time.